This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukraine and its Western allies are engaged in fast-track talks on the possibility of arming the invaded country with long-range missiles and military aircraft, AP correspondent Sarah Nafa reports.
Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said Ukraine's supporters in the West understand how the war is developing and know the need to supply planes capable of providing cover for armored vehicles that the United States and Germany pledged at the beginning of the month, a decision that led to criticism not only from the Kremlin, but from the Secretary General of NATO and European Union member Hungary. Amid the news of the Western pledges of heavy tanks, Russia bombarded Ukraine with exploding drones and artillery shells. The fighting has largely been deadlocked over the past months, with winter conditions slowing down ground operations and neither side reporting significant progress. I'm Sarah Nafa.
NATO is concerned about North Korea's reckless missile tests and nuclear weapons program. While the war in Ukraine has ramifications for Asia, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin on Sunday.
We also know that North Korea is providing military support to the Russian war efforts with rockets and missiles, and this just highlights how we are interconnected.
Stoltenberg, in remarks at the beginning of the meeting, citing allegations that Pyongyang is providing military support to the Russian war efforts. At least 51 people were killed in two separate transport accidents in western Pakistan on Sunday when a bus plunged off a bridge and a boat carrying a class of children capsized. 41 are so far confirmed after the bus crash in the southwestern province, while at least 10 students died in the boating accident in the northwest, officials said. This is VOA News. Pope Francis on Sunday prayed for the end of violence in the Holy Land after a fatal Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin resulted in the death of 10 Palestinians in response to the killing of 7 people by a Palestinian gunman. 7 people, including a 14-year-old, were shot dead on Friday in the attack, the worst on Israelis in the Jerusalem area since 2008, which drew wide international condemnation and heightened fears of an already spiraling violence escalating further. The Israeli military said on Saturday it was sending additional troops into the West Bank, which has seen months of worsening clashes that culminated in 2022 with the highest death toll, including militants and civilians, in more than a decade. Final preparations are being made at a cathedral in Kinshasa on Sunday ahead of Pope Francis's visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo. His long-awaited visit to the country and South Sudan next week comes after he postponed an earlier trip late last year that originally had included a stop in the volatile East. Pope Francis is due to arrive in Kinshasa, the country's capital, on Tuesday for a 3-day visit. Turkey has issued a travel warning for its citizens living in or planning on going to European countries, citing Islamophobia and anti-Turkish demonstrations. The warning comes after last weekend's protests in Sweden, where an anti-Islam activist burned the Quran and pro-Kurdish groups protested against Turkey. Following the protests, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan warned Sweden not to expect support for its NATO membership bid. Nigeria's central bank will extend by 10 days a deadline for swapping old Naira currency notes, it said in a statement on Sunday. Nigerians will now have until February 10th to turn in 1,500 and 200 notes. The central bank started releasing newly designed notes last month, but many say they cannot find them at banks or cash machines. The CBN governor, in a statement, said the new deadline would allow more of those in rural communities to exchange the old notes. After the February 10th deadline, the statement said Nigerians would have a further 7 days to deposit old notes directly with the CBN. Nigerian legislators and opposition presidential candidate Akatu Apagar had called on the central bank to extend the January 31st deadline. The latter said the extension would help in, quote, reducing the financial consequences for citizens. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Peshawar's police chief says a suicide bomber blew himself up inside a crowded mosque in a highly fortified security compound in Pakistan on Monday, killing 59 people, including 27 police officials. Reuters correspondent Lauren Anthony reports.
Hospital officials said scores were wounded, with many of them in a critical condition. A police official said that there were at least 260 people in the mosque when the explosion happened. Social worker Mahad Bilal was quickly on the scene.
As soon as we received information about the blast, I jumped into an Edhi Foundation ambulance and came here.
Peshawar is an area where Islamist militants remain active, though no one immediately claimed responsibility for the bombing. The blast ripped through the mosque during noon prayers, causing a wall to collapse on top of worshippers.
That's Reuters correspondent Lauren Anthony. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Israel Monday for the first time since Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu regained power. His visit comes at what Blinken called a pivotal moment, with tensions rising in the Middle East. Linda Gradstein reports for VOA from Jerusalem.
Secretary Blinken arrived in Israel amid growing tensions on several fronts. A terrorist attack near a Jerusalem synagogue left 7 people dead Friday. An Israeli raid on a militant stronghold in the West Bank town of Jenin killed 10 Palestinians Thursday. Blinken urged both the Israelis and Palestinians to calm tensions.
And that's crucial to moving toward our enduring goal of Palestinians and Israelis enjoying equal measures.
Blinken meets Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas Tuesday in the West Bank. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Jerusalem.
This is VOA News. The United States will not provide F-16 fighter jets that Ukraine has sought in its fight against Russia, President Joe Biden said on Monday, as Russian forces claimed a series of incremental gains in the country's east. Ukraine planned to push for Western fourth-generation fighter jets, such as the F-16, after securing supplies of main battle tanks last week, an advisor to Ukraine's defense minister said on Friday. Asked if the United States would provide the jets, Biden told reporters at the White House no. U.S. President Joe Biden is going to end the nation's coronavirus emergencies, the AP's Ed Donahue reports.
The president is telling Congress the national emergency and public health emergency declarations will end May 11th, nearly 3 years after they were first declared. They were in effect when Joe Biden took office.
We will get through this. We will defeat this pandemic.
The change will restructure virus response, treating it as an endemic threat to public health, managed through normal authority of government agencies. House Republicans want the emergencies to end right away and are getting ready to start investigations into the government's virus response. Ed Donahue, Washington.
The U.S. has placed sanctions on a leader in a Mexican drug cartel, AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
The U.S. Treasury Department has sanctioned an international operator, the Sinaloa drug cartel, whose activities span the globe. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control blocked any U.S. properties of Jose Angel Rivera Zazueta and 2 other men. The department said Rivera Zazueta's network operates on a global scale with nodes in the U.S., Mexico, South and Central America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. He's said to be an importer of precursor chemicals from China to Mexico, which are then used to manufacture synthetic drugs, including fentanyl and meth. Over 70,000 Americans died of overdoses involving opioids in 2020, mainly fentanyl. I'm Norman Hall.
A mining corporation has apologized for losing a tiny, highly radioactive capsule over an 870-mile stretch of Western Australia. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
The capsules, part of a device believed to have fallen off a truck, are being transported between a desert mine site and the city of Perth on January 10. The truck transporting the capsule had arrived at a Perth depot on January 16. The cesium-137 ceramic source, commonly used in radioactive gauges, emits dangerous amounts of radiation, equivalent of receiving 10 X-rays in an hour. It could cause skin burns, and prolonged exposure could cause cancer. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. In Washington, I'm Jeff Custer. Ukraine officials Tuesday described the first wave of tanks the country will receive following pledges from its Western allies. Associated Press correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says in the first wave of contributions, the armed forces of Ukraine will receive from 120 to 140 Western-model tanks, adding that these will include German-made Leopards, British Challengers and US M1 Abrams. Kuleba has declined to name specific countries contributing, saying many of them still have to make formal decisions in accordance with their internal procedures. However, he said that 12 states have pledged tanks so far, and Kyiv was working to persuade others to join. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg continued his tour of East Asia Tuesday with a stop in Japan, where he met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Speaking to reporters following the meeting in Tokyo, Stoltenberg warned what happens in Europe can happen in Asia, noting China's own aggressive behavior.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, this would send a message that authoritarian regimes can achieve their goals through brute force. This is dangerous. Beijing is watching closely and learning lessons that may influence its future decisions. What is happening in Europe today could happen in East Asia tomorrow.
Japan has been quick to join the U.S.-led economic sanctions against Russia and provided humanitarian aid and non-combative defense equipment to the Ukrainians. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. New data released Tuesday shows the Eurozone managed to show economic growth in the final 3 months of 2022, avoiding a recession even as sky-high energy costs, slumping consumer confidence, and rising interest rates have taken a toll on the bloc's economy. Reuters correspondent Julian Satterthwaite reports.
Figures out Tuesday showed surprise growth over the final 3 months of last year. The bloc's economy eked out expansion of 0.1% over the fourth quarter. Not much, but better than the drop that economists had expected. Among big countries, Germany and Italy saw economic activity contract. But France and Spain posted expansion. The gains come despite an energy price crunch. Soaring costs for fuel have depleted household savings and held back investment. They've also forced the European Central Bank into unprecedented rate hikes to cool inflation. But the region's economy has shown unexpected resilience too. This week that prompted the IMF to raise its forecasts for growth. It now expects the Eurozone economy to expand 0.7% this year. That's up from an earlier prediction of 0.5%.
That's Reuters correspondent Julian Satterthwaite reporting. U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to take two big funding announcements this week regarding rail service on the U.S. East Coast. Associated Press correspondent Ed Donahue reports.
It's a new day and another old rail tunnel for Joe Biden.
The structure is deteriorating. The roof is leaking. The floor is sinking. This is the United States of America, for God's sake.
After highlighting a project to replace aging and inadequate infrastructure in Baltimore, the president heads to New York's West Side Rail Yard to showcase a nearly $300 million federal grant for the long-delayed Hudson Tunnel project, renovations to a 1910 train tunnel between New York and New Jersey that carries about 200,000 passengers a day.
Made in America, with union labor.
Ahead of a Wednesday meeting where House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is expected to press for deep spending cuts, the trips form a sort of counter-programming highlighting big projects the White House says will create blue-collar jobs and boost economic growth. Jennifer King, Washington.
As part of his trip to the Middle East Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank city of Ramallah. Blinken was meeting Abbas a day after talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In Ramallah, Blinken discussed with the Palestinian Authority's decision to halt security coordination with Israel. The security ties, which in the past are believed to help contain violence, are deeply unpopular among everyday Palestinians who accuse Abbas of acting on behalf of the Israeli military. You'll find expanded coverage of world news and events at voanews.com 24 hours a day. I'm Jeff Custer. This is VOA News.